freaking 4.5, 5 Okeechobee special, baby. Get her back. Just flipping a crawdaddy. It seems like they're targeting on this hydrilla. And even the water's come up because we had a big storm. But they were further out. I caught some fish. I don't know. I had this waypointed. I'm wondering if there's something to this. We're gonna go down this line and see.
That's a big one. That's a broad one, boy. Oh man. I'm gonna put her on the scale real quick. Look at that giant. $7.11. Look at that joker. Let's let her go quick here. You know, I'm starting to get frustrated a little bit. So I haven't had a ton of bites. And there's this one stretch that I got. Right here, it's a hard line inside wall. I caught a 5-year this morning and a couple dinks. Last week I caught a 4.5, missed a couple, but it's like this 100-yard stretch and everything looks the same. And then all of a sudden, like, you just make a pass and you get a couple bites and you leave. Oh, that made my day though. Been having a tough day. I had tilt and trim issues this morning. It kind of sucked. That's freaking cool though. So in the last couple of videos, a lot of you guys commented that you really enjoyed when I reviewed the baits, techniques, and some of the terminal tackle that I was using when we were fishing out there. Kind of got into some details, showed you exactly what we're, putting on the end of the rod, dropping into stuff, throwing into stuff. So, on popular demand, I'm gonna bring this to you again. We're gonna go through the baits and the vids, not too many of them, but also the techniques and some of the little nuanced details that really put together this killer day of freaking punching. So stay tuned, there's more to come. We're gonna do some commentary on baits, techniques, tips and tricks, and maybe some other stuff. So we'll see where it goes. So let's start with the meat here. What were we throwing, what we're using, what colors, what baits, what styles? Well, they were all gambler. And really, there was a mix of baits, but it really came down to one in the end. I'm gonna show you what I started with and then what I ended up with. One of the first things I like to throw when I'm punching mats is a Why Not. The Why Not is compact. It's very easy to get through the mats because it has this thicker body up here, so your hook's not always popping out. Very streamlined, unique body profile. My favorite freaking color, back at you. I don't care how many people tell you black blue is the best color in Florida and in general bass fishing. It's true, but the better color than black blue is when you swirl up like this and get back at you. It looks just like the brim. It's caught me so many freaking big fish, dude, I can't tell you. But this was the deal to start out. I caught some little guys on it, but it's what I like to start out with when I'm punching mats like that. The other bait that I always test too, and this is another one of my favorite colors. This is a Burner Crawl and Killer G. Once again, a gambler deal. Now here's the big difference between the Why Not and the Burner Crawl. You'll immediately notice like the main bodies where you hook them is pretty much the same, but the Burner Crawl has kicker legs, whereas the Why Not has kind of like a paddle that you can actually pull apart and separate. Now, usually, depending on the fish's mood, if they're more active, I'm gonna go with the Burner Crawl because you get more action, you get more kick. If the fish seem a little more lethargic or, you know, nuanced, you gotta kind of like tweak them into biting, I'll go with the Why Not because it has that more straight profile. But in the end, you know, punching with these, I caught a few little guys, but they really didn't pay the bills that day, man. It just wasn't the deal. Let me show you what the deal was bait-wise that day. And you guys know I like to kick it old school a bit, so this is very much kicking it old school. Old school gambler crawdaddy, baby. You can see the profile is a little bit thinner on the main body of the bait. This makes for better hookups because the hook will pop through. Only crappy part about it is the hook pops through a lot when you're actually like punching the mats and that, so it's a little bit annoying, but it's a very do nothing, no action bait. These claws will kick just a little bit as it goes through the mat, but overall it's a very streamlined bait. It's almost like throwing a stick bait. It doesn't do much, does a little bit of quivering, but there's no kicking action like you'll get from like the Burner Crawl legs like that. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And when you're fishing a lake like Okeechobee where everybody's dropping on them, flipping, punching, they're seeing a ton of baits, and sometimes turning back to that old school like history that, you know, where your roots are and where you started can be really key, because those fish bit that bait back in the day. They haven't seen it as much because people always like to throw new stuff. I mean, I do it, you know, the Why Not came out a couple years ago, I started throwing it. The Burner Crawl came out, I started throwing it. But sometimes you turn back the clock and you stumble upon a classic and you remember why that classic was such a strong player in your punching game back in the day. So let's talk about terminal tackle. What am I using on my setup? Well, I was running 2 sizes of weights, and the reason for that is a lot of the cover I was punching, some of it was kind of sparse. There were some thicker things, especially towards the end of the video. You notice that we got into some real straight up floating mats. However, early in the video, some of that cover was just a little kind of maybe a ball of hydrilla or just a little smidge of like hydrilla stuck between some pads. Not super tight cover, not super hard to get through. So I mix it up between a 1 1/4 and a 1 1/2. Now, if I had one weight to throw, 99% of the time it'd be a 1 1/2 ounce tungsten weight. This is a Rains. I like them. They're a little more compact, and they do have the insert, which I kind of prefer with the braid. But the 1 1/2 kind of showed off, and it usually does. They see that weight a lot more, but overall you can get through just about anything you need to get through, and they'll bite it. You start getting above a 1 1/2, especially when you get into 2s and 2 1/2s, the bait kind of knocks out of the fish's mouth, but in those situations, it's the only way to really get to those fish. So I varied, and I kind of got a feeling for the fish, had the 1 1/4 tied on, had a 1 1/2 tied on, kind of used them as need be. If I needed a heavier one, went to the 1 1/2. If I could get away with a little lighter, I went to the 1 1/4. But by the end of the day, I was pretty much pitching the 1 1/2 and punching on through with that. Hook wise, and dude, I get so much hell for this, but I like them. They work for me. I've never opened one up, and the worst thing I've had to have, there's 2 things. I got one pack that I rolled tips on like 4 years ago, and then it never happened again. And then every once in a while, when you use them too long, the keeper starts to roll. And that's the Strike King Hack Attack punching hook, man. It's super wide gauge, and I know a lot of people like the Gummies and all the new school stuff. I just like these. They're durable, they're workhorses, they freaking won't open up. You can boat flip a 7-pounder, dude. They're not gonna open up. And the keeper actually stays pretty well in place. Like I said, if you're using them like all the time and you're never changing your hook, keeper's gonna start rolling. But it's a real simple, nice, wide plastic keeper that's glued on there. None of the wires or like little stick out stuff or any of that kind of garbage. It's simple, it's solid, and day in and day out, man, these hooks have performed. Now, obviously, I'm Snelling that hook, and I got my setup right back here. Let me grab it real quick. Now, sadly, this isn't the exact rod I was punching with because Powell doesn't make that rod anymore, which was my favorite punching rod. It's a Powell 795 Endurance, but they don't make it anymore, so I had to go find something else. So what I'm actually using right now to punch with, I still have my 795 Endurance, but I found a Dobbins. It's super expensive, like crazy expensive. It's the Champion Extreme Series 795. It's not cheap. It's like $350, $360, but it's almost exactly the same rod as that Powell 795 Endurance. However, just a side note, I think Powell might be coming out with a new line of the Endurance. I'm hoping the actions got a little soft in the Max 3Ds, and I'm hoping the new Endurance is kind of a clone of the old Endurance, just with some improvements. But the blanks on those Max 3Ds, which were supposed to replace the Endurance, they got a little soft. So I'm hoping they go back to that slightly stiffer kind of, it's just that a nice tip on the blank, but at the same time, it's a little bit stiffer rod because I don't know if I can afford another one of these $360 Dobbins. But as a note, this is a killer freaking rod. It's worth every penny. And it's what I'm using now for punching mats. And I have it as a backup too in case I break my Powell 795 Endurance, because I always like having two rods rigged up. Like I was talking about having a 1 1/4 and a 1 1/2. I always want to have a backup because I have broke some rods in the past, and then I'm SOL and I don't got a punching stick. But let's talk about this terminal tackle deal. So I was mentioning the hook that I like is that Strike King Hack Attack. And of course, we are going to snell it. Why do we snell? Because it kicks the hook up just like that. And you can see how to tie a snell knot. I got a video up there. It's actually probably one of my more popular like uploads. So check that out. It's from quite a few years ago. It's a real slow walkthrough. Shows you exactly how to tie a simple snell knot. You can check that out. I'll put a little note, a card that you can click on to check it out in the corner. But kicks that hook up. You want that in the mats because you're not always going to feel the bite totally, and it really allows you to kind of, instead of whacking hard on them, you can hit them, but you don't need to hit them so hard, and you get that great positive hook set right through the mouth. Now you'll also notice I have double bobber stoppers on here, and this is a trick my buddy Donnie Bass taught me. These are 6 cents bobber stoppers, but basically, why do you put 2 on? Because then you don't gotta frickin' put another one on when you burn it off and you're only running 1. Because what ends up happening, you're flipping mats, you catch some fish, this braid starts cutting at those bobber stoppers and you end up losing a bobber stopper. Now if you only have 1 tied on, you gotta go ahead, cut everything off, put another friggin' bobber stopper on there. This way, I can burn off a bobber stopper, especially if I'm fishing a tournament or some kind of little derby. You don't wanna pause, you wanna be efficient. So I got another one, I got a backup basically, kind of like having 2 rods to punch with. So I don't got to worry about all that jazz. Now reel wise, yeah man, I just can't seem to find a replacement for this when it comes to punching. Once again, kicking it old school baby because it works. Corrado 200E, this is the 721, it's the fast one. Sadly, you can't get these anymore unless you pay somebody way too much for a used one that you find on eBay. But this is the reel I go to when I'm punching, when I'm flipping heavy stuff. It's super solid. You can lock that drag down. It doesn't kick out any line like some of the newer reels and that. Super solid. And let me tell you about this too. I got Power Pro Slick on here. I'm not 100% sold on it, but it is quieter than the original Power Pro, and it does have the same strength capabilities. I'm not worried about it snapping like some of those new Fusion lines that you get where they're super quiet, but if you go and get them near hard cover, it causes nicks, it causes issues, and you end up freaking breaking off at the least best time, to say the least. But I also like too, the Power Pro Slick comes in a brownish color. And you know, down in Florida, Okeechobee, any of the natural lakes, like the real true natural like shallow swamp lakes, they're tannic, dude. They're like a brown tea colored water, and a lot of the grass tends to have like a yellowish brownish tinge to it. I mean, it's green grass, but there's a lot of yellows incorporated into the water as well as some browns. So I kind of like it for the coloration. It's a little bit different. That green tends to white out a lot. The brown, it does white out, but it kind of retains some of that that tinge where, especially if I'm pitching around like canes and like reed heads that are mixed in the mats, dude, it looks just like the base of the reed head. So it's a little more camouflage, I think, without doing the whole black line deal on that. So let's talk punching tips and day details here, because today was a great example of one of the biggest principles that I have. Like, a lot of people ask me like, dude, like, what's the key to pitching mats? What's the key to punching? And you know what? Like, anybody who's ever fished a big lake like Lake Okeechobee and fished heavy cover and punched, you'll be like, well, there's like a million different things that can be key and like a million things that might not be key depending on the day that you're out there. Nature's a funky thing, dude. It really depends on when, what, where, how, like the weather, the cloud cover, the watercolor, the stage that the fish are in from a seasonal standpoint. There's so many factors, dude. So I always try to think about like, what's one of the basics? Like, what's one thing that actually that matters 365 days out of the year? And today was an awesome example, because what matters is isolated cover. And you'll notice, and it was especially apparent in those last few fish catches, there was isolated pennywort mats, just like this chunk just stuck right there. And you could even see, like, I was like idling between stuff. It wasn't like I was fishing a line, but like, especially that last fish, you saw it's like a giant, like, I think there was some water hyacinth mixed in and some pennywort, but it's just like this chunk of mat, like 6 by 8 or so, stuck there, and that's it, dude. Like, there's cane and all that other stuff around, but when it comes to mat punching, that's all that was there. And it was just a chunk. And those isolated targets are really what draw bigger fish. And it's not just when you're punching. I mean, it's any kind of flipping or pitching. If you have an isolated reed head, an isolated round reed head, isolated holes in the grass, like, that loneliness is what seems to draw those bigger fish, or even just draw any fish to a certain area, because it's different, because it's alone and separate. So that's one big key from today, and that's one of the few generalities I'll ever say about like fishing Lake Okeechobee, fishing Kissimmee. If you can find isolated cover, it can be annoying to fish because you got to like hop between it and that, but the payoff can be huge. So 2 other tips today, and one actually plays off the isolated thing as well. So some of the first fish you saw, it was on a stretch of hardline that runs for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of yards and looks all the same. So plunk, plunk, plunk. Well, over the past few weeks, I sort of isolated a section where I continually get bites. And this is where all that offshore fishing is coming into play, because basically what I did is I started dropping waypoints when I'd catch a fish over 4 pounds. And I went back and I looked at those waypoints, and I'm like, dude, I've caught like 5 or 6 fish over 4 pounds within this 100-yard stretch in the past 3 weeks. And like, the light goes on, it's like, obviously there's something to that. So I kind of hedged my technology to figure out an isolated area within a broad, general, looks all the same kind of area. And then using that technology, I knew instead of trying to fish that entire hard line and pitch all those mats and probably get 1 or 2 bites out of the entire thing, I could go and focus on a section that I had identified as, this is where I'm getting the big bites. I can come in here in the morning, flip through it, get 1 bite, leave, come back in 2 or 3 hours. And that's actually when I caught that 7+, is on the second time I went back there a few hours later. But there's definitely something to it. So finding that sweet spot, which in a sense is an isolated spot within an area, you know, within the same stuff, finding something different. And even those fish that I caught within that area, they were on a slightly different grass setup. There were these small little hydrilla chunks inside the lily pads, and really targeting those, not targeting, there were floating mats in there like hyacinth and pennywort. Forget those, dude. It was all about these little, it was a mix of pondweed and hydrilla just stuck in the lily pads just off of the cattails, and that's where I got all my big bites. And it was really key to target those because there were a bunch of them, but you really had to target those and not let your mind drift to other things. So the second tip, and the last one for this video, is we kind of recap the day, a killer day of punching. I think we ended up with like, we had like 26 pound, 25 pound, just awesome. Dude, I love punching for fish, and it's my worst enemy because I'll get stuck in a, you know, when you should be doing something else, I'll get stuck trying to do it. But when it comes together, it is the most fun way to freaking catch them ever. It's such a rush, dude. But so last and final tip, one big thing that came into play, I got big bites today. I caught a few little guys, but I got big bites. and I fished a lot of heavy cover, but I fished a lot of heavy cover in some very high pressured areas on Lake Okeechobee. And one thing that I really think set me apart, or set what I was doing apart from other guys, because dude, I saw other guys fishing this stuff, but what set it apart was delivery. Dude, you're pitching this giant freaking weight. There's a 1.5 ounce weight. It goes, I mean, that's the reason I call it plunking, you know, plunk, plunk. Dude, when you pitch it in there and you don't feather it, it just, it's like dropping a bomb, dude. But what I really focused on doing was feathering that bait, especially early in the morning when we were targeting those little hydrilla like chunks like that, because you get a lot more sploosh because the hydrilla isn't totally, it's up to the surface, but there's a lot more water around it. You can get away with a little bit more when you're fishing the totally floating vegetation like hyacinth, like pennywort mats, water lettuce, because you have all that vegetation on top that'll kind of catch the bait and then it'll just kind of wiggle its way through. But especially those bites in the morning, targeting those little hydrilla patches, feathering that bait and not plunking, not bloop, bloop, bloop. And I know you fished with guys like that before. You know, you'll be in the back of the boat and you'll hear the dude on the front bloop, 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 and he's freaking plunking, dude. He's freaking dropping bombs on that. Yeah, I gotta watch my mouth. He's dropping bombs on it, you know what I'm saying? But doing that slightly different, you'd be amazed, especially in higher pressured areas, the difference that it makes. Those fish are used to hearing that. They've been around the block before, especially when you're talking about a fish 4 pounds plus. And when they hear that, that's danger zone, dude. I mean, it's the same idea when you talk about like trolling motor wash. Like, stay off the trolling motor, stay quiet, creep. Actually, you know what? That's another tip. All right, so no plunking. Bloop, bloop. Don't do that. That was key. The other thing was that I played the wind. There was a slight breeze. And dude, every chance I got, I stayed off my trolling motor, and I tried not to use the power pole. I used it in some points to kind of lock up, but I stayed off of cover and tried to stay off the trolling motor. And I think that wraps it up, unless some other crazy stuff pops into my head. But that's the day recap. I know you guys like seeing the baits and kind of getting a better idea of what was going on, so I hope you'll appreciate this kind of wrap up and high detail stuff, even though you got to listen to me talk to you like this. But that was the deal. A killer day of punching in the books. I haven't had enough of those like in the past couple years. Fishing hasn't been what it should be, but it is what it is, dude. You can get it every once in a while and you're more than happy. Reminds me of some other things, but whatever, dude. So killer day of punching. Make sure you like and subscribe. I think we're about to break, or we just did break 20K. I'd like to build the channel, dude. Like let's get this thing up to 25, 30K. Let's show people what real fishing is about, dude. And just being down to earth and not foofy, dude. We want to fish. We want to learn. We want to share our perspective. That's what it's about. So keep the lines tight, dude. If you like this, comment, like it. If you got a question, hit me up, dude. I always love to talk fishing, punching, whatever. So keep the lines tight and no plunking, boys. Check it out.